Okay, ready to get started, Eleanor? I can
Yeah.
kick us off. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Autism and Adulthood seminar series. I'm Dr. Karen Lindgren. I'm the Chief Clinical Officer at Bancroft, and it's just really wonderful to see so many of you returning, and welcome to all those people who are tuning in for the first time. This series represents a partnership between the Drexel Autism Institute and Bancroft to integrate research and clinical care in ways that meaningfully improve the quality of life for autistic individuals. As a reminder, today's session is being recorded and will be shared afterwards through the Autism Institute's social channels. Please feel free to share your questions and comments through the chat throughout the seminar, and we'll be sure to have some time for discussion at the end. Eleonora?
Hi, I'm Eleonora Paolizzi. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at Drexel and Bancroft. And today, before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to underscore the importance of today's seminar. Article 23rd of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights reminds us that everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, and to just and favorable condition, and to protection against unemployment. Yet many autistic adults are still denied full access to this right. It's our shared responsibility to come together and to define best practices, develop inclusive guidelines, and ensure that the right to work truly applies to everyone. And today, it's my honor to welcome our guests, Dr. Dena Gassner, who brings both the professional expertise and decades of powerful advocacy, and Dr. Matthew Lerner, who's an associate professor and director of the Social Connection and Treatment Lab. And he's internationally recognized for his work supporting autistic individuals throughout the transition to adulthood and beyond. So without further ado, I'm gonna let Matt and Dina take the stage.
So,
All right,
Matt, who's
thank you.
running the deck? Are you going to
I
do it?
am. I got
Good.
it.
All right.
I got you. Okay. Um, Thank you all so much for having us. We are thrilled to be able to share our perspectives on this work with you. So, we're here today talking about ideas and ways to build inclusive workplaces for autistic employees. So we want to start off, though, by just quickly acknowledging our own positionality around this topic, which I think is so important for any work when you're trying to, really reflect on how you as an individual engage with what it is you're talking about. So I'm Matt. I use he, him pronouns. I'm an autism researcher and professor who really has focused my career on autism community engagement from even before I was in academia, and something I care profoundly about. I'm also a husband and parent, and I also am a friend to many autistic and other neurodiverse folks. That's something that is part of my personality and something I value. I learn a lot from my friends and colleagues. And adding this in recently, I also very much center my positionality in this work around the value of what's called tikkun olam, which is the Hebrew phrase of sort of healing the world, right? And the idea that, my goal with all of this work is to try to advance that value.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dina, and I use she, her pronouns. And my positionality includes focusing on neuroaffirming research here at Drexel. And I'm the parent of two neurodivergent adults.
No way it's doing that. All right. So our agenda today, to just briefly talk about what is autism. Everyone on this call, I presume, knows something about that, but we just want to talk about that question, particularly in reference to the question of why should this matter for employment? We're also then going to talk about what's key to address before employment, particularly with the goal of kind of springboarding towards success. What are the things to think about to help folks succeed even before a job, even before an interview? I'm going to talk a little bit about why it's important to hire autistic and other neurodivergent folks. Again, many people on this call probably know that, but many people in the world don't. And we want to really reaffirm that. We want to talk about what's different about the process for autistic job seekers based on what we know about autism. We're going to talk then a little bit about who actually typically gets hired for jobs and why seeking employment, therefore, is harder for autistic people and the issues around masking and challenges of networking. We're then going to talk about interviews, how to adapt them and provide support to make them more accessible for autistic people. We're going to talk about the issues of onboarding, including disclosure, setting clear expectations, and building natural supports, as well as how to finally, think about creating physical and social, cultural, and the cultural environments that can be accessible for autistic people. Dena?
So all aboard. It's time to get on the train to talk about why hiring autistic persons is just simply smart business. Here are some of the relative strengths that commonly occur in our population. Strong attention to detail. They're wicked reliable and dedicated and loyal. When you look at the track record for days missed at work, autistic people don't do that. Unless we cannot lift our heads, we still show up. We're often inordinately committed to achievement and mastery of essential skills. Their pattern thinking, unusual ways of problem solving, and creativity can result in increased and targeted innovation. Diverse companies often outperform others who seek more sameness despite improved profitability. Inclusive workplaces often shift an atmosphere with improved caring. Hiring autistic adults can help to educate the entire workforce, building empathy and improving professional growth for all employees. So what is autism? I'm going to give you this lengthy description, but it's getting a lot of positive feedback. This comes from my dissertation. Autism is a heterogeneic, which means unique condition associated with differences in how the brain seeks, sends, and perceives information in ways that affect the person's learning, organization, social engagement, and communication. It is a dynamic condition whose features ebb and flow in expression, not only throughout the lifetime, but even from moment to moment. Autism is demonstrated with evolving presentations throughout the lifespan, with difficulties with social understanding, communication, repetitive behaviors, or unusual or sensitive responses to sensory input in the environment. It is often accompanied by highly focused interests. Autism knows no boundaries in regard to race, ethnicity, gender, or socioeconomic status. Slide.
Yep.
So who are we as autistic people? I love this video because it talks about perspective, right? When the rhino is painting the elephant, he has a rhino horn in the middle of the photo because he sees the photo through his perception. So we're going to talk about perception on this. So autistic people, we are people with processing issues that can stand alone. And if it does stand alone, it could look more like a learning disability. Or it could be that it looks more like ADHD, or it could co-occur with ADHD and learning disabilities and manifest as executive function issues. We're often misperceived as non-disabled due to the effortful but sometimes inconsistent capacity to mask. And we'll talk about masking in a moment. And our limited ability to evenly sustain work effort. We tend to work in peaks and valleys. We are people who may struggle with social communication, and that includes accessing functional language, understanding office culture, conversational rhythms, difficulty regulating throughout the day, and we may require more time for recovery through the day or at the end of the day. We may have increased difficulty releasing the day with greater recovery time being needed. Slide.
Yep.
So we're going to talk by talking about the individual first, okay? Autistic people, again, are people with high pockets of talent and capacity, but we may, Matt?
Sorry.
We may have limited ability to utilize these strength areas, and it may be compromised as the demand for complex efforts or multitasking or shifting attention and external pressure rises. We are individuals with interoception barriers, and that means the way our mind and our body communicate to one another for things like I'm hungry, I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed, those communications can be impaired and may only become evident when we're already over the finish line. We're already overloaded and overwhelmed. And that means that we're having trouble regulating, self-regulating, and managing anxiety or stress or tension in our day. Next.
And just jumping in on that, as well, right? So these are things that can affect employment, in much subtler but more pervasive ways than just, does a person know what their job tasks are, right? Because you can know what your job tasks are, but if you're missing your bodily cue that like you're really hungry or that that this chair that you're sitting in is uncomfortable or you're feeling stressed and dysregulated and struggling to do that, those are things that exist between the person and getting the job task done. And so often when we're thinking about creating um, inclusive environments and supporting autistic people to be successful, we have to actually account for those factors too, and not just assume that autistic people, like non-autistic people or many non-autistic people, can just sort of deal with them or push through them, right? We have to figure out ways to create settings where those things are being supported too, so that folks can actually demonstrate the very strengths and knowledge that Dena was just talking about.
We may struggle with social misunderstandings. In my accommodations documentation, I have allocated that if I'm having a communication breakdown, I can bring Matt in as my supervisor, but not in that role. I'm bringing him in as my translator to help me and the third party understand if there's a communication breakdown. We may miss cues. We may misunderstand expectations. And we may not understand the intentions of people when we're trying to interact with them. We really have to work hard at life skills mastery first and foremost. When we look at students who go into post-secondary settings or adults who move out on their own, it's quite sadly often the case that people who are capable of employment may never have had academic exposure to independent living skills. Quite often, our individuals with less overtly presenting support needs are focused entirely on academic achievement, and they leave high school without the other part of IDEA, which is the ability to live autonomously with minimal support from their families or the community. And so we really struggle with work-life balance. So for example, I cook a vat of something every Sunday and freeze it in small containers for individual portions. I live alone right now. If I had to cook a full meal every night, my work-life balance would not flow. So by cooking once a week, I get meals for the whole week that I can rotate in and out in the freezer. But if I were just focused entirely on academic learning and no one ever taught me something that simple that could really ease my workflow, then I might be really struggling to maintain all of the balls in the air that you have to maintain to be able to work, maintain a car, take care of your health care, and be able to live on your own. And there has to be a good work fit. And so by work fit, what I mean is the job description quite often doesn't align with our capacities because our capacities are somewhat scattered. So, for example, Matt knows that I'm not good at Excel, and that was originally in my job description. And I asked him if he was going to send me to training school for that, and he just deleted it from the job description because we have people who do those things, right? And so that was quite a relief for me because Excel makes my head hurt. And then there's the issue of disclosure, right? It's very complicated, this topic of who do you tell, when do you tell, and how much do you share about your condition? My friend Stephen Shore edited a book on disclosure, and in it they talk about big D disclosure, I'm autistic, here's how I experience things, or little d disclosures, which are closer to things like, hey, overhead lighting gives me a migraine headache. Can we turn those off? No one said that they have autism in that disclosure. It's a different way to get to the objective. Quite honestly, a lot of our autistic folks struggle with white lies, and they may not be able to do that unless it was 100% true. But that's still the option, and we can teach and share how to do those partial disclosures. It's necessary when there are differences in expectations and priorities. It can create greater stigma, and so a lot of people are fearful of disclosure. And that can be one of the negative consequences of disclosure and getting a diagnosis. The positive, and the reason I received accommodations in the workplace, is I wanted consistency and legal protection. So gosh forbid, my boss over there, Mr. Lerner, winds up not coming to work for quite a while because something bad happens. I need to know that those supports don't exit with him. I need to know that no matter who I'm being supervised with, my accommodations are in process. But in full disclosure, I'm going to be 68 years old in a week. And I don't have to work for a living. That's a huge privilege. I thrive when I work. And so I can't be successful and productive for my boss without these accommodations. And if my boss didn't want to give me these accommodations, I would not be able to work here or probably anywhere where I couldn't get them because they're game changers. I'll give you an example. I'm very, very sensitive to overhead lighting. And Matt has seen me walk into his meeting for a one-to-one meeting with the overhead on, and I think I can handle it. And within 10 minutes, I'm crying because that's how my dysregulation shows. By the way, the content isn't upsetting at all. It's the lighting. And so it would be very hard for me to work somewhere where I had to work in a cubicle and I had no lighting control. Next.
So I just want to also just talk about, because Dena talked about the values and strengths of autistic people and being able to work in the workplace. And I also just want to sort of hat tip the fact that this is not just unique to autism. That the amazing Dr. Brooke Ellison, who sadly passed away last year, but as a colleague and friend of ours. Um, um, did incredible work in the idea in advancing the concept that we need to stop thinking about disability always implying vulnerability, right? Disability and employing and disabled people can be valuable to the setting and valuable to the person. So individuals with disabilities in general, right, often have to live their lives being more creative and thinking through how they navigate different spaces, different environments, sometimes quite literally, having to come up with out of the box problem solving skills and having to deploy those skills effectively and quickly. Leadership skills, often, disabled folks are the folks who have to be the leaders in advancing, getting what their needs are met, and then others come along too, right? These are things that can come naturally from the experience of living with a disability, and then having to be resilient in this space. And then finally, strength. There's a strength in navigating a world that's fundamentally not set up for you, right? Whether a person has a physical disability, a cognitive disability, an emotional disability, a social disability, any of these different domains, all of these things are going to come into play to get to the point of even seeking a job, and then certainly in navigating having a job. So I really want to, take a moment to appreciate this broader point, which comes into play in really stark relief when we're talking about autistic adults. So what is different for autistic job seekers? So a few key things that can be different. First of all, expectations of the job might be less clear. Expectations of what is needed, what the job might entail. A lot of things that are written in kind of HR speak might be much more difficult to sort of immediately parse and then understand. And so a job might either look great but not be clear, or it may actually be great, but not be clearly articulated. So then the job match might not be evident, right? A good fit can be missed, right? You could somebody might say, "Gosh, this says that you need to be able to, you know, navigate contemporary technology and workflow expectations. And somebody might look at that and go, I don't even know what that means in those words structure that are. I don't often know what those means when those words mean when structured in that order, even if I have to write them. Right? You're sort of trying to sort of fit it to the broadest appropriate framework that characterizes what the job will actually entail. But if somebody needs specificity, thrives on specificity and clarity, that person might look at that, go, this is word soup, and move past it, even if it's exactly a good fit for what they can do and are trained for. Or a bad fit could be misinterpreted. Somebody might think, gosh, this looks great. It says that I'm supposed to do a sequence of organizational and structural tasks that leverage the knowledge, being a knowledge professional. Um, I know many autistic people who might go, oh, I can do all of those things. But the actual ins and outs of that specific job might be completely overwhelming, or for various different structural and sensory reasons, like Dena was talking about, but really incompatible with that person's work style. And then you're going to have these misses. And um, and this contributes to the fact that, research, well, there's a lot of variation on it, suggests that the vast majority of autistic adults are either unemployed or underemployed. And this is a huge part of why. This relates to this factor of, do I like it versus can I do it versus am I good at it? Right? These are three very different things to think about when you want a job. One of my favorite examples, but also kind of a heartbreaking example, is a young adult who I worked with who said who loved video games and wanted to work. This is back when GameStop was not just a meme stock, but an actual buy video games. And he was like, I love video games. I'm gonna go work at. I like video games. I get to be around them all day long. And we did a sort of work trial experience at a GameStop for a day, just a day. And he came away and he was like, do not want to work there. And I'm like, why? And he's like, well, I love the games, but one, nobody else in this place knew as much about these games as I do, and that was annoying to me. I had to spend my time, talking to people about, games that I didn't think were any good. And also, I wasn't spending time playing games. I was just talking about them, and it just frustrated me it just made me want to get home and get to my own gaming system as soon as possible, not actually be here. And so he ended up really having this powerful lesson learned about the distinction between, do I like this topic versus is this a thing that I can do and am good at doing? And so he actually ended up taking a job nearby in the same mall, working in sort of like sorting and stocking in a sports apparel store, because he was like, I don't really like much about sports apparel, but I sure can help them know exactly how many Nikes they got in today and make sure, and I can do better than anyone else in getting that right and making sure they don't have stocking issues. And then I can take the money I use, walk over to GameStop and get my games. So, that's really important. Also, I think that role of, interoception or reflection that we talked about before is really important, right? The ability to pause and, it was, he didn't just spontaneously realize that. We needed to have a discussion because the interoception of how hard was this on my body? How hard was this on my brain? How hard was this on my own self-regulatory and physical capacity to do this task? Was not something he was readily looking at. And so prompting that reflection is an extra step that many autistic job seekers need to be able to say, okay, is this really a good fit for me versus what I thought? And also just effort expenditure, right? For all of the reasons we're talking about, it is often the case that even when autistic folks are well matched to a job, can do it well, and can do it on time in all the ways expected, it takes more effort. This, by the way, is related to the previous, to Brooke Ellison's work about disability, right? The extra effort, the tax of having to do that extra planning, think about your sensory environment, think about those social demands, think about their interoception, makes it harder to do those things. And so it's not just can I do it and I'm good at it, but can I handle the effort expenditure? This is actually why some of the research literature on employment in autism suggests that not all, but many autistic folks actually prefer not to work full time, but maybe work like 80% time, so that they have that time opportunity for recovery. And many folks, autistic folks, actually eschew opportunities for things like promotion because they're like, "Gosh, I don't want to do that." Even if I might get paid a little bit more, taking on this new job that's unfamiliar, unexpected, confusing, and overwhelming, and has a bunch of extra work might burn me out.
Yeah, and to
So,
piggyback on that,
please,
real quick, Matt, the
yeah.
other two factors are the hidden curriculum of the job. Like, my son was
Hmm.
like, okay, I think I would like to work with pets at a veterinary office. I said, are you going to be okay cleaning up poo? And are you going to okay when the dog is too sick and it has to be put to sleep? And he goes, oh, I couldn't do that. Right. So,
Hmm.
a lot of times, parents and teachers don't dig into that hidden curriculum. The other thing is during identity development, when most kids are identifying for themselves their relative strengths and they're considering cool jobs that might be out there, our kids are just treading water. And so when you ask them what they want to do, they may not be anything on that whiteboard in their head. And so they may need to have a lot of trial work experiences and opportunities to try things. But you also have to have infused them with strong resilience capacities because they're going to fail and they need to fail to help them figure out what they're better suited to do. And that can be very labor intensive and emotionally bankrupting. So go
Yeah.
ahead, Matt.
Yeah, no, very well. And I think that this relates then to the question of, who typically gets hired for a job, just in general, right? Often the people who get hired for jobs are people who interview well, people who can sell themselves well and kind of speak the speak, and people who can play the game, right? Both the social game and the sort of, again, knowing or at least pretending to know all the lingo of the specific position, people who can network, right? Networking is so crucial to to job placement and hiring, um, particularly for non-entry level jobs or jobs in things like academic or corporate or more complex settings. And this is often the case even and above the people who have the skill for the job, right? There's plenty of folks, if we walk down the street to the Wharton Business School, here at Penn or Drexel's business school, right? And you talk to the folks who um, study employment and study what makes people successful. The literature is so consistently clear that it's often people who can do those first four things. They will often get hired above the person who has better skills for the job. And this is a challenge because all of these can be harder for autistic people. So it's literally we have a system, talk about a system that's not built for you, right? We have a system that prioritizes and rewards the very things that can be harder for autistic people. And this is in part, because the ways in which autistic folks often have to navigate this is through this process of masking, which Dena's going to talk about next slide. But this process of sort of having to effortfully I monitor and regulate the way one is in a setting to meet neurotypical or non-autistic standards, and then also engage in kind of some of that social, networking, which is again, these are extra difficult for folks on the spectrum.
And first of all, let me clarify one thing. Everybody masks. We tend to assign this to uniquely to autistic people, but the reality of it is everyone masks. Who you are in the workplace is probably not who you are on a girls' night out, right? And so, first of all, we need to just accept that masking is part of employment, but it's harder, more labor intensive, and more demanding for autistic people and many other neurodivergent personalities. But this is some of the information about the harms of camouflaging or masking. Um, Many adults report camouflaging in order to fit in. Participants described how they led to challenges in recognizing they needed help and difficulty requesting help and having success with that request. Findings indicated gender difference for reasons for camouflaging, with autistic women more likely to endorse conventional reasons, getting by. Both camouflaging highly across contexts and switching between camouflaging in other contexts, but not in others, is related to poor mental health. I mean, the reality of it is, no matter who you are, if you're not able to be authentic, at least in your core identity, then you're probably not going to have strong mental health capacities. And lifetime non-suicidal self-injurious behavior, camouflaging, ADHD, depression, anxiety, unmet support needs, dissatisfaction with living arrangements are all significantly correlated with suicidality. So we want to create a neuroaffirming workplace where masking demands are minimized and the amount of effort exhausted to do that masking is minimized. Slide.
So let's talk about the interview process. How can we make the interview process something that is more accessible for autistic people, right? Assuming everybody on this Zoom is at least is bought into the idea that this is worthwhile doing, would like to hire and support and create environments that work better for autistic people. Let's start at the interview. What do we do differently? Number
So
one is using, go ahead, please. Oh yeah,
no,
sorry.
no, you go.
Is that's all right. We can toggle. Using inclusive language in the advertisement, right? Being intentional about this, right? These are things that might seem sort of small, but saying expressly that, you welcome flexibility of work approach or time or location, or, are mindful of the sensory needs involved, right? Like these are ways of signaling to people that, you take this seriously, and that it's not just another process, another job
Give you a
process.
quick example. If I see that you wrote ASD instead of autistic, that's going to be a red flag to me because no one wants to be referenced as disordered. Autism is a perfectly usable word. We don't have to embrace the medical model for everything except diagnostics and services, right? But when we're talking about a workplace culture, autism is perfectly usable. Another red flag for me is if the person uses person first identity, wait a minute, person first language, because
Identity
most of the
first, or
because most of the
oh,
autism community has embraced identity first language, which means I'm autistic. I'm not a person with autism. And it's important to know the history of that real briefly, that it came from well-intended parents and teachers who wanted their child to be seen as a person first. But our community has interpreted that as an erasure of our autistic identity. And it didn't generate from within our community. It was generated outside our community. So that's why you'll often find autistic people using autism, maybe on the spectrum, but even that is an erasure of the fact that we're autistic. It's part of everything I do. It's part of every element of my body. And I'm not ashamed of that. And so that's why I use identity first language. We want to focus on the skills required and not necessarily interview capacity unless it's a customer facing position. My son had an adaptive interview for a position where he's volunteering in a museum, and he listened to everything they had to say. They asked very open-ended questions, so he gave very brief answers because he's got expressive language challenges. But then they asked him why he thought he'd like to work there, and he opened his phone and he showed his room, which looks as good as any museum I've ever been in. And he's a collector, and everything's immaculate and impeccable. And they were just gobsmacked with his portfolio. That's an alternative way to measure capacity. The fact that he didn't understand and couldn't execute the traditional back and forth exchange was really important. And then at the end, they said, "Do you have any questions for us?" And he started asking questions about how long the museum was going to continue to be under renovation. When are they going to fix the clock? The hands were not right today when he arrived. When are they going to turn the fountain back on? Because that's part of the museum. Is the polar bear going to be returned back from the public library now that the renovations are over? So that showed that he had this depth of experience with the museum that if he hadn't been offered the option to ask questions, they would never have captured. Now, here's the sad news. He still doesn't have a job there. They still don't know how to incorporate him into the practice in that workplace. So he volunteers, he's happy. I parked my mommy helicopter, and I'm trying to release the fact that I know he has so much talent that's being untapped. Another way to adapt the interview is to do a sideways discussion. So many autistic people have spent hours and hours in rooms with desks, with people in authority behind them, controlling their lives. And it took us a long time to figure out that was a trauma trigger for my son, but I could imagine it would be for many people. And so the best interviews he's executed have been what we call sideways conversations. If you've seen that movie, Sideways, it talks about how women communicate face to face, but men communicate side to side at a bar, at a sporting event, at NASCAR. And so if you take someone who's on the spectrum out for a walk around the office or for an walk around the area, if you have a nice park-like setting, quite often it's so much easier for them to have a conversation without having to make eye contact. So, and don't demand eye contact. They're listening. If they can't look at you, that's okay. Give them the questions in advance so they can prepare their thoughts and their anxiety will be reduced and they'll be able to perform more efficiently. Evaluate your sensory setting. Again, overhead lighting is quite often problematic for our population. Unexpected sounds, so don't schedule anything during a planned fire drill, for example. Sometimes odors can be problematic, so watch your perfume or scented candles in the interview space. Again, I told you about the alternative presentation of my son's capacity and, adapt the job for the person's strengths. Even if it's a part-time position where you're working in your strengths is better than a full-time position where half of the job is overwhelming for you. So job carving is a good plan too, carving out the best strengths. Next.
So onboarding. So once you're onboarding somebody, right, when a couple of important things to keep in mind. Disclosure. Disclosure is complicated. There are strengths to the benefits to disclosure of one's autism status particularly in terms of maybe legally mandated accommodations or people understanding, but it can also promote stigma. It can also promote misunderstanding, especially if people don't know about autism already. It can actually make things much harder. And also that's asking somebody to make a pretty significant personal risk, take a pretty significant personal risk to share something very personal about themselves. So, we need to be cautious about suggesting that disclosure is always important. I think it's important for an individual to reflect for themselves on the pros and cons of disclosure. It's also important to be thinking through setting clear expectations, bilaterally, expectations of the job. So saying, these are my expectations as a supervisor. What are your expectations? And trying to think through how to do that together, thinking about the technical expectations of the job, right? Dena brought up the example of Microsoft Excel, right? And saying, all right, this is this a technical expectation of the job? Yes, it can be, but if that's going to be a challenge for you, in this case, we were able to make it work, saying that's actually not a skill you necessarily need to have, but that may not be the case in some cases. Right? Time and location requirements, being really clear and concrete. This is a 9-to-5 job. This is not a 9-to-5 job. This is a job where you might be expected to work at home. This is a job where you are only expected to work in the office. Making those things clear, and also when and if this may flex. This is a 9-to-5 job a lot of the time, but sometimes during, let's say, a very busy season, you may have to flex outside of that, right? Being really clear about that is important. Thinking about is the goal of the job inputs, like you will come in and do X number of hours of work, or you will come in and do X tasks, or outputs, like you will have produced these reports, or you will have produced this widget, right? Or you will have an R lab, produced X number of papers or grants, right? Differentiating those things is really important because it's not always clear. And if the goal is outputs, then understanding what inputs are necessary is important. Making clear that it's vital for individuals to be meeting their own needs, right? That if you have personal needs, health needs, mental health needs, physical health needs, travel needs, that these are things that folks need to be encouraged to be able to do as much as possible, and think through as much as possible so that they're ready to work. Thinking about what's needed versus what's feasible for the job, right? We might say, this is what we really think we need, but the task might be too hard, right? How do we navigate that? And also what a supervisor can and can't do, right? A supervisor can provide, as Dena talked about, guidance, clarity, feedback, but maybe can't always play, a lot of other roles, other input roles or guidance roles, or do tasks for the individual, right? Being really clear about that up front makes a huge difference. Thinking about then, you also want to think about the workplace culture, right? What is the culture? Is this a dress down or dress up environment? Is this a place where we take lunch breaks or not? Is this a place where folks are meant to just sort of chat casually, or if you're going to do that, do you do that in a private space, right? Having that clearly articulated makes it easier. And then also building in natural supports, understanding that a lot of these things don't necessarily have to be built in are expressly. They can be built in through having natural like breaks during the day, finding ways to articulate a person's needs, and building individual relationships. In terms of the physical environment, right? Dena talked about no lighting, thinking about noise, odors. These are all things that can make getting the work done harder, right? Employers want to focus on, can the work get done, right? And if that's the case, framing, having different lighting, minimizing noise, minimizing odors, right? These are things that impede a person's ability to do their job. Having flexibility on hours or location for tasks is really important, right? Or understanding that if somebody needs to be able to or can work at home sometimes, knowing that and having that be clear, and having clear locations and even labels. This is this person's space for this purpose. Often setting up the person's schedule so that there are transition buffers, right? Set shifting is hard for autistic people, right? Just saying, okay, we're doing this right now. We are giving a talk, and right after this, Dena might have a totally different meeting, right? I will have a very different meeting that is nothing like this, right? If we can build in buffers so that folks have a moment to reconstitute themselves, it makes getting the work done either, as well as time for processing. When possible, building out checklists, visual supports, and transparent steps is really important. Although I will say also as a manager, like I don't always know what those are, or part of my job, part of it might be to say to the employee, I need you to think about what they are because I can't necessarily do that. But setting up the expectation that those can be used, or maybe a person can create one and say, do you have any feedback for me on this? That can be important. This is including for self-evaluation around work responsibilities, right? Checklist where a person can reflect on themselves and say, am I actually getting the things done that I need to be? Importantly, even small actions can make a big difference. Having posters around the office or pictures that demonstrate these values. There are things like color cards or lanyards that people sometimes wear. We have them at the Autism Institute where anyone can grab them. If it's green, it might say you can come approach to me and chat with me. Red means leave me alone unless you're a certain person. Yellow is sort of in the middle. But offering alternatives and options, these are all, they might seem small, but can make a huge difference. In terms of social environment, reinforcing when things go right. I cannot stress how important this is. So often as managers or employers, we find ourselves catching, all right, here's something that went wrong. This needs to be fixed. This needs to be different. But actually expressly saying, hey, that went well, or that meeting went well, or that interaction was really successful can make such a huge difference. It can be morale boosting, but also for autistic folks who might not have as much clarity on what the sort of social or cultural expectations are, it can be hugely guiding to say, gosh, that's what you're looking for out of this interaction. Don't expect a person to just pick it up intuitively. Also providing that interpersonal support or translator or check-in person, like Dena said before, right? Having a person you can say, hey, I'm just curious, did that go right? Or I misunderstood, or I just need a minute to talk through this can you translate what this person said for me, right? Even doing that for 5 minutes can make a huge difference. On the job training, often again, learning the tasks through doing them can makes a huge difference. And again, the supervisor's role can be that interpersonal or process check. It's important to maybe alter supervisory methods and feedback to meet the individual where they are to ensure comprehension, clarity, specificity. There's a large literature now actually in in the business world about this for supporting neurodiverse employees. That sometimes, again, breaking things down or just thinking about how you're presenting them for clarity and specificity can make a huge difference for successful supervision. Also, being clear when things must flex, right? We prep and we plan, and then the world doesn't go as we expect. And that is okay. But being clear that that is the case is vital for making it not become overwhelming. Offering individualized supports and check-ins for people can also, again, make that huge difference. And again, having a team that supports one another. So having access check-ins, for to normalize grace. This is one of the things that we do on our team is we often start our meetings with just saying, all right, everyone, give me a quick access check-in. What are your needs right now? Everybody. There's a whole literature on this. We'll save it for another time, but importantly, just doing that is a way of choreographing the fact that yes, the team values each and every person's needs and getting them met so that we can be successful together. And building spaces for authentic mentorship and friendship is also vital. We'll also, again, being mindful of sort of clarity around boundaries. We also maybe need to provide a menu of options for support. So, if you're providing an individual support, so having that clearly laid out so that you know what the options are. Sometimes an individual plan might be needed. And folks might need support with exactly these sorts of things, right? Task prioritization. I can help you talk through what your tasks are for the day and how to prioritize them. I can help you think through your long and short-term goals. Again, these are things we implicitly do with all employees to some degree, but even more so with autistic employees. We might think about how to assign projects in a systematic and predictable manner so that it's not all of a sudden, it's the end of my day and now the person says they've got 10 new tasks on their plate. How do you manage that? And then again, utilization of daily and guidance and feedback. But I think it's important in general. It's just embrace the messiness. It's gonna be messy, right? It's not gonna be always super clear and straightforward. And that is okay, right? That is part of trying to create a neuro-inclusive workspace. In terms of bigger picture actions, again, we want to thank our colleague Eva Gerba for her work in preparing some of this material. We can train and mentor neurodivergent and disabled priorities. Just making that an explicit priority can make a huge difference. You can hire neurodiversity and disability consultants to consider issues of access, to reflect your own workplace and say, how can you do better? We can work interdisciplinarily with neurodivergent and disabled professionals across different domains. And also continuing to learn about neurodiversity and disability. For anybody for whom this is your first talk on this topic, I hope it's not your last. Right? Engage with the works by neurodivergent and disabled people who have written far more extensively on this. You can take courses and trainings on disability, including some that are offered right here at the Drexel Autism Institute. And also learn from organizations that specialize in this. We are so fortunate to have the Transition Pathways program here, which is really a pioneer in employment support and helping young autistic adults find and secure successful competitive employment. Reach out to those organizations and say, how can I learn from you? And then also looking for trainings on neuroinclusive workplace collaboration. I would give the one caveat that that's not always true for everyone in all settings. That is, the goal should not be to say, I want to start hiring. If you're a place that has never done this before, saying, I want to start hiring autistic people, doing a training for everyone at your whole giant business of 100 or 1,000 people on autism or neurodiversity can actually sometimes increase stigma. So sometimes it's valuable to start small, start proximally to make sure that the environment that you're building works and then grow out from there. I'm going to just jump through this, just highlighting again, neurodivergent disabled people exist in every space, so whether you know it or not, you already have hired autistic people and neurodivergent people in your and disabled people in your workplace, whether or not they've told you. So think proactively instead of reactively about creating access spaces. Dena, you want to give us a wrap up?
So this is a picture of my son after he had been through a really tragic post-secondary program. And now he's on campus at Marshall University in this image. And he's clearly communicating as I'm walking 15 paces behind him. I got this, Mom. To me, that captures the very essence of resilience. Resilience is a dynamic process encompassing positive adaptation within the context of significant adversity. There must be exposure or a significant threat, and there must be the achievement of positive adaptation. You have to realize just how many of these things that people have already endured, how many traumas, how many negative interactions, and yet the ability to bounce back is something that many autistic people have to be taught. It isn't intuitive for us quite often. And so reminding us of our strengths, I would tell my son that program lied to us. That program failed you. You didn't fail the program. But if you go to Marshall and I find out you're up all night playing video games and not going to class, you're coming home. So there was accountability and there were expectations articulated. And by the way, I didn't need to do that because he follows all the rules and he never missed a class in 5 years he was there. But the prior program had no relative comparison to know his true capacity. They just took one look at someone who didn't speak verbally very comfortably and presumed that he was unable to learn. He now has a bachelor's degree with a 3.0 GPA. So clearly he had some capacities. Next. But we don't outgrow our autism. This is a picture of me at a national conference. The floors are concrete, the walls are brick, there's no acoustical protection. The table you see is one of only 3 in the entire center with over 200 people there. They had a live band who was live, but they didn't need amplification, but they were amplified anyway. And my little colleague is standing there next to me, Chloe, who works at Vanderbilt now, has her pink ear defenders on and her weighted vest that squeezes her if she gets out of her body and she needs to regulate. She's got her AAC device on her. She is fully equipped for the evening's activities. And I am unprepared because even though I'm an autistic at 68 years old, I still forget to prep sometimes. And you can see my discomfort on my face. I'm in agony and I left within 10 minutes. So slide, Matt. So you don't outgrow your autism, you grow into it. People who are really successfully managing autism in the workplace have integrated their diagnosis. They've started to understand what they need and what will help them be successful. I will say we have to keep in mind developmental differences. I'm able to get and articulate the communication needs I have and the other physical needs I have, largely because as an adult, I have acquired all that self-awareness. We don't always have that in our 20s and our 30s. As Temple Grandin said about one of my colleagues, I was no Temple Grandin at 25 either. And so you have to keep that in mind. Next.
Great. And so we have hopefully at least maybe 5 minutes for discussion, maybe less, 5 minutes or less for discussion. But we hope this was useful information. We're excited to hear from you.
It was an incredible presentation, and thank you for even bringing a lot of your personal experience. We really appreciate that. It really brings everything that you say to the real world and bridges science with actual lived experience. So we're really grateful.
And Matt, I know how your schedule goes, and I know a lot of you have to, fade out here, but I can stay on for a few minutes if people have questions.
I can do the same.
Okay.
Thank you. I guess we'll see, first of all, are there any questions from the audience? Just feel free to raise your hand.
Jody Taylor is saying that love the real life experiences and examples.
I had a question. I actually had 2 questions I was considering while you were talking. One, are there words individuals you recommend put on their resume around this, particularly in the world we're in now where is reading the resumes and making recommendations to employers about who gets interviews. Is there any recommendation that you generally give around how individuals might indicate their neurodivergence early on in the process? And is that a pro or a con for these companies that are reading resumes through AI?
I have not had that experience, but I would project that because all structured systems do not really help to illustrate our capacities. I mean, think about a psychological evaluation for an IQ. You know,
Right.
my son's IQ score never went above 70 his whole high school career, but yet he gets a bachelor's degree.
Right.
So I wonder how sensitized AI would be to someone who has these neurodivergent subtleness and needs. I think it's one of the greatest strengths I have is that, you know, we think of autism as a lack of something, a lack of this, a lack of that. I have too much of things. I'm on the other end of that bell curve. I'm an extrovert on steroids. And that